Good afternoon. Today I'm going to read the last chapter of The Undiscovered Self by C.G. Jung. And before I do that, I want to mention that on Monday evening at our regular meeting of the Carl Jung Depth Psychology Reading Group, I'll be doing an analysis of the sentencing statement that Michael Cohen made to the judge last Wednesday in the context of Jungian psychology. I won't be taking a position from a political perspective, but talking about what I see in that. And particularly, I'll be talking about his reference to this book, The Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And Dr. Frankl was a psychiatrist before World War II, and he spent 3 years in 4 different prison camps in Nazi Germany during World War II. And he learned a lot at that time. And one of the big things he learned about was meaning. And so today I'm going to read about meaning from Dr. Jung's perspective. But on Monday evening, I'll be talking about meaning as it relates to Michael Cohen and what Viktor Frankl had to say. So if you want to get a head start on that meeting, please drop by your local Barnes & Noble and pick up a copy of Man's Search for Meaning. But today, I'm working with The Undiscovered Self by C.G. Jung, and I'm reading Chapter 7, The Meaning of Self-Knowledge. Hello, Martin. Welcome. What our age thinks of as the shadow and inferior part of the psyche contains more than something merely negative. The very fact that through self-knowledge, i.e., by exploring our own souls, we come upon the instincts and their world of imagery should throw some light on the powers slumbering in the psyche, of which we are seldom aware so long as all goes well. They are potentialities of the greatest dynamism, and it depends entirely on the preparedness and attitude of the conscious mind whether the eruption of these forces and the images and ideas associated with them will tend towards construction or catastrophe. The psychologist seems to be the only person who knows from experience how precarious the psychic preparedness of modern man is, for he is the only one who sees himself compelled to seek out in man's nature those helpful forces and ideas which over and over have enabled the individual to find the right way through darkness and danger. For this exacting work, the psychologist requires all his patience. He may not rely on any traditional oughts and musts, leaving the other person to make all the effort and contenting himself with the easy role of advisor and admonisher. Everyone knows the futility of preaching about things that are desirable, yet the general helplessness in this situation is so great and the need so dire that one prefers to repeat the old mistake instead of racking one's brains over a subjective problem. Besides, it is always a question of treating one single individual only, and not 10,000, where the trouble one takes would ostensibly have more impressive results, though one knows well enough that nothing has happened at all unless the individual changes. The effect on all individuals, which one would like to see realized, may not set in for hundreds of years, for the spiritual transformation of mankind follows the slow tread of the centuries, and cannot be hurried or held up by any rational process of reflection, let alone brought to fruition in one generation. What does lie within our reach, however, is the change in individuals who have or create an opportunity to influence others of like mind in their circle of acquaintance. I do not mean by persuading or preaching. I am thinking rather of the well-known fact that anyone who has insight into his own action and has thus found access to the unconscious involuntarily exercises an influence on his environment. The deepening and broadening of his consciousness produce the kind of effect which the primitives call mana. It is an unintentional some outtakes necessary. It is an unintentional influence on the unconscious of others, a sort of unconscious prestige, and its effect lasts only so long as it is not disturbed by conscious intention. Nor does the striving for self-knowledge altogether shun the prospect of social amelioration, since there exists a factor which, though completely disregarded, meets our expectations halfway. This is the unconscious zeitgeist. It compensates, well, I think we ought to have the definition of zeitgeist, so I'm going to excuse my reading for just a moment to get the official translation of zeitgeist. Okay, German to English. Zeitgeist. Zeitgeist is zeitgeist, so that's very helpful. Thank you, Google. So you better know what it means, because I don't. So I'll reread that paragraph from the beginning. Nor does the striving for self-knowledge altogether shun the prospect of social amelioration, since there exists a factor which, though completely disregarded, meets our expectations halfway. This is the unconscious zeitgeist. It compensates the attitude of the conscious mind and anticipates changes to come. An excellent example of this is modern art, though seeming to deal with aesthetic problems, it is really performing a work of psychological education on the public by breaking down and destroying their previous aesthetic views of what is beautiful in form and meaningful in content. The pleasingness of the artistic product is replaced by chill abstractions of the most subjective nature, which brusquely slam the door on the naive and romantic delight in the senses and their obligatory love for the object. This tells us, in plain and universal language, that the prophetic spirit of art has turned away from the old object relationship and towards the, for the time being, dark chaos of subjectivism. Certainly art, so far as we can judge of it, has not yet discovered in this darkness what it is that holds all men together and could give expression to their psychic wholeness. Since reflection seems to be needed for this purpose, it may be that such discoveries are reserved for other fields of endeavor. Great art till now has always derived its fruitfulness from the myth, from the unconscious process of symbolization, which continues through the ages and which, as the primordial manifestation of the human spirit, will continue to be the root of all creation in the future. The development of modern art, with its seemingly nihilistic trend towards disintegration, must be understood as the symptom and symbol of a mood of world destruction and world renewal that has set its mark on our age. This mood makes itself felt everywhere, politically, socially, and philosophically. We are living in what the Greeks called the kairos, the right time, for a metamorphosis of the gods, i.e., of the fundamental principles and symbols. This peculiarity of our time, which is certainly not of our conscious choosing, is the expression of the unconscious man within us who is changing. Coming generations will have to take account of this momentous transformation if humanity is not to destroy itself through the might of its own technology and science. As at the beginning of the Christian era, so again today we are faced with the problem of the moral backwardness which has failed to keep pace with our scientific, technical, and social developments. So much is at stake, and so much depends on the psychological constitution of modern man. Is he capable of resisting the temptation to use his power for the purpose of staging a world Is he capable of resisting the temptation to use his power for the purpose of staging a world conflagration? Is he conscious of the path he is treading and what the conclusions are that must be drawn from the present world situation and his own psychic situation? Does he know that he is on the point of losing the life-preserving myth of the inner man? Does he know that he is on the point of losing the life-preserving myth of the inner man, which Christianity has treasured up for him? Does he realize what lies in store should this catastrophe ever befall him? Is he even capable at all of realizing that this would be a catastrophe? And finally, does the individual know that he is the make-weight that tips the scales? Happiness and contentment, equability of soul, and meaningfulness of life, these can be experienced only by the individual and not by a state, which, on the one hand, is nothing but a convention of independent individuals, and on the other, continually threatens to paralyze and suppress the individual. The psychiatrist is one of those who know most about the conditions of the soul's welfare, upon which so infinitely much depends in the social sum. The social and political circumstances of the time are certainly of considerable significance, but their importance for the weal or woe of the individual has been boundlessly overestimated insofar as they are taken for the sole deciding factors. In this respect, all our social goals commit the error of overlooking the psychology of the person for whom they are intended, and very often of promoting only his illusions. I hope, therefore, that a psychiatrist who in the course of a long life has devoted himself to the causes and consequences of psychic disorders may be permitted to express his opinion in all the modesty enjoined upon him as an individual about the questions raised by the world situation today. I am neither spurred on by excessive optimism nor in love with high ideals, but am merely concerned with the fate of the individual human being, that infinitesimal unit on whom a world depends, and whom, if we read the meaning of the Christian method, If we read the meaning of the Christian message aright, even God seeks his goal. I'll read that sentence one more time. I'll see if I can read infinitesimal again. I am neither spurred on by excessive optimism nor in love with high ideals, but am merely concerned with the fate of the individual human being, that infinitesimal unit on whom a world depends, and in whom, if we read the meaning of the Christian message aright, even God seeks his goal. So that is the end. So I've been reading from The Undiscovered Self by C.G. Jung, Chapter 7, and I've now completed the book. So let's see what you folks have to say. Seems a lot. Martin says, the defining spirit or mood of a particular period of history, as shown by the ideas and beliefs of the time, as the Zeitgeist definition. Okay, so it's the defining spirit or mood of a particular period of history, as shown by the ideas and beliefs of the time. Thank you, Martin. I appreciate that. Miles says, Skip, you influenced a conversation I had with a stranger about climate change on the street last night. She was diametrically opposite on almost everything, but I did not allow the devil's trick. Good. We found agreement that the solution will be found inside us, i.e. in the heart. Way to go, Miles. And Miles says, so Thomas says, anyone who has insight into his own actions and has thus found access to the unconscious involuntarily exercises an influence on his environments. This is something I've seen. It gives hope. World spirit. Wow, so true, Thomas. Nice statement. That encapsulates things, says Miles, or the spirit of the times. Yes. Okay, so I've completed The Undiscovered Self. I've been thinking that a few of these books, one of them being The Undiscovered Self, but also Man and His Symbols, one ought to read probably once a year. Memories, Dreams, Reflections is another one, because they at least set the stage for what Dr. Jung was talking about. And when we circumambulate, we get deeper and deeper. And so we see things that we didn't see in the previous reading. And this has particularly come to mind for me in the last few days, because I found on YouTube a reading of Man and His Symbols. And it's quite a good reading. And I started to read it. It's in many videos. Each one is about an hour long. But I would recommend it to you if you like to read books in audible form. And Thomas says the Greek word is, I believe, kairos. I thought that's what I said, but maybe I didn't. Anyway, and so we've been talking about meaning and the meaning of the individual. And Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. This is a commemorative edition of this book. It's been printed more than 100 times, and in English. It's been, let's see, this book has now lived to see nearly 100 printings in English, in addition to having been published in 21 other languages. And the English editions alone have sold more than 3 million copies. So I can recommend this book to you. The first half of it talks about some of the specific experiences Viktor Frankl had in Auschwitz. But It has a lot of very interesting observations, and it sounds very Jungian, and I will leave it to your cleverness to understand why Dr. Jung isn't here, but in any case, it is very Jungian in its sense. And so I've marked a few things in tabs. I'm not going to spoil the surprise, but I will read from this book in part on Monday evening as I go through Michael Cohen's statement. It's very interesting that, Michael Cohen's statement relates to this book, Two Essays on Analytical Psychology by C.G. Jung, which is volume 7 of the collected works, and particularly to paragraph 395, and to a couple of specific sentences in 395. And so I'll just read those to you. In his dealings with the visible world, a man must certainly be mad to suppose that he is the master of his world. Here we follow quite naturally the principle of non-resistance to all superior forces, up to a certain individual limit, beyond which the most peaceful citizen becomes a bloody revolutionary. And so I think that we could all see how Michael Cohen, who, when he joined our president more than a decade ago, said that his incarceration began at that time, and then he followed the path of least resistance, and finally he's reached his personal limit and has become, if not a bloody revolutionary, at least metaphorically a bloody revolutionary. And I think it's fair to say that as we look at others in the coming couple of months, we're likely to see more individual revolutions from the story of our president, let's say. So anyway, let's see. Thomas quotes Jung saying, "Coming generations will have to take account of this momentous transformation if humanity is not to destroy itself through the might of its own technology and science." Very definitely. And it's not only climate change, it's also we have a president right now who says, well, why can't we use nuclear weapons? And, when we have a president who's basically wet behind the ears on international affairs and the powers that we have as a nation, it's pretty frightening, actually. Fortunately, we have many other people in service who know the risks and know the costs, but those people have been tempered over decades of training, and I personally have experienced that training up to the National War College level and the Naval War College level in the U.S. Marine Corps. And so I know the training of those men, and so I don't believe that they would allow the president to do something that is purely inappropriate. But now we don't have one of the generals in place who we did have or we won't have after the first of the year. So may peace be upon all of us. Mr. Krishnamurti says, what do cigarettes do for healing the psyche? I haven't the foggiest notion. I think like other intoxicants or other things that one becomes addicted to, they may replace the spirit, just as we talked about from Alcoholics Anonymous. And so we'll talk about that more on Monday, because it seems to me, as I've looked through Michael Cohen's talk, I printed out his talk, and down the side I put the numbers of the various 12 steps that one finds in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I think, and in 12-step programs generally, and I think Michael Cohen actually hit all 12 of them. So, but we'll talk about that Monday night. So if you are not familiar with Alcoholics Anonymous or 12-step programs, you might want to check them out on Wikipedia before Monday night, and then we can have a good conversation about them, because Michael Cohen certainly has hit all 12. Whether he did that consciously or not, I don't know. But I think it's very interesting that he did that in his talk to the judge the other day before he was sentenced. And Sean says he thinks, I presume you're talking about cigarettes. They're for performance anxiety, only utility I can plainly see. I don't know. I had a father who smoked for 60 years, and when I was a young boy, he was smoking 2 packs a day. He tried some of the methods to stop smoking, and what finally made him stop was when he had to go on oxygen. And so he stopped cold turkey at that point and lived another 15 years. And so he lived to be 83, which is quite an old age considering what he went through. And, you know, how many cigarettes he smoked in that time. So I don't know what the utility was for him. Certainly he had an addiction to nicotine throughout most of his life, and from the time I first knew him on. So anyway, I promised my wife I would make today's session shorter. I'm thinking tomorrow I may read The Man of Personality. And this is The Man of Personality is an essay which appears in 2 essays on analytical psychology. And I think it might be interesting because we certainly have at least one example of that in our current affairs. So anyway, Martin says the shadow archetype of addiction of the lover in the psyche. Yep, maybe. Fortunately, I've never had to break that habit, so I can't speak to that one from experience. Anyway, thank you for joining me today, and I will see you soon, maybe tomorrow, maybe not until Monday. But in any case, on Monday at 8 p.m., I'll be talking about Michael Cohen's statement to the judge. I will not be talking about his political convictions. Thank you, Miles. Miles says Skip is the Trevi Fountain of Jung. Well, maybe. Actually, as it so happens, yesterday's video was the 800th video that I've put on this channel since June of 2016, and I think that's quite a milestone. It really amounts to in many ways, it amounts to a graduate course in Jungian psychology. I'm not saying it is from a Jung Institute point of view, not to make you a Jungian analyst at all, but it is a pretty comprehensive coverage. And so if you want to know something more about Jungian psychology, you might go back to the 3 playlists that cover the last 3 years, which the first one is JRG 1. It's not JRG 11, it's JRG 1, and then there's JRG 2 and JRG 3. So those cover the various sessions of the reading group that I've posted over the years. And so there's lots to see there. There's probably 400 hours of video about Dr. Jung's work there. And that does not include the 55 or so hours worth that is in the advanced reading group, where we have been discussing ion for the last 8 months or so. So anyway, thank you for coming today, and I will see you again soon. Take care now.